Okay, so today's agenda is about Justinian. We'll start with Justinian, the Great. He unifies the empire again after the fall of Rome. So we're starting about the time of the fall of the Rome, and we're going to go forward from that point forward. And he restores the empire to a former glory. And then we have the Muslim invasions begin to change everything in the Eastern world. And there is a major new controversy that arises over the use of icons that changes this symphonia for a short period of time. It actually kind of takes it away, where the emperor turns against the church and causes great difficulty. And what we at this leads actually to what's known as the last ecumenical council that we celebrate when? This coming Sunday, right? It's going to be a Sunday of Orthodoxy. So that's where we're going to end, is what we celebrate on Sunday today. So there is still one church. That's the important thing to remember. There's not two churches here. There's not three churches. There's just one church. And but the seeds or differences are beginning to rise that we'll pick up in our discussions next week, where we begin to discover the Great Schism. Okay, so let's talk about Justinian the Great. He's a very important character, an emperor, very pious. That was 410 was when the Rome basically fell, right, under Alaric the Visigoths. And so this led to a collapse of authority in the West. So this is where things start changing about the role of the Pope in the West from this fall of Rome. Pretty soon he's got all new kinds of duties and things to take care of that weren't there before. So it was a chaotic period begins in the West. It begins to play a greater unifying role, trying to bring things back together, and a lot of different dispersed activities are taking place within the church and outside of the church in the West. So the seeds of change are taking place in the West, beginning at this point in time. But in 527, as when time's right, I guess, there's a new leader that is brought to the surface, right, to help us overcome the difficulties. And this was Justinian, was the person at the right time in the right place. So he was highly educated. He was quite different than Constantine in this sense. He was very educated in theology, law, and Roman tradition, and a deeply pious person. So this is a truly Christian emperor that's taking over power at this point in time. He was born in 482 in a peasant village. So again, it's coming from a small background, right? And so it's kind of maybe like a biblical pattern, like David the shepherd becomes king, right? So he's a very simple person that also becomes king or emperor. His uncle, Justin I, another good emperor, by the way, was a great soldier. He became emperor in 518. So now this is how Constantine becomes in power, is through his uncle. So his uncle was very pious, and he was very interested in maintaining doctrinal unity, because there still were differences that were taking place as a result of the councils that had taken place. Nothing had been totally resolved. The doctrine was clear, but people didn't all accept this one doctrine. So Justin adopted his nephew, Justinian, and gave him education in Constantinople, and he became his close advisor. So eventually, as he got older, he became running really the day-to-day affairs of the empire as Justin became old and infirm. So it was a natural transition that took place between Justin and Justinian. Like Justin had prepared him to carry forward from his rule. He married Theodora, also was of humble background, who has played some important role. We're not going to touch much on her today. And then he becomes emperor in 527 at the death of Justin I. And there was just a peaceful transition that took place. Everyone assumed that Justinian would be the ruler because he was basically ruling, carrying out the duties of the ruler by the time Justin passed away. But Justinian had a view of his reign, probably not much different than Justin. He saw his reign as a sacred calling, that his calling was to unify the empire under Orthodox Christianity. This was his idea of being emperor and being called to serve it this way. So he saw himself as serving as God's agent, ordering both the church and society to be operating in harmony, in a harmonious way together. So same idea, the symphonia that we talked about earlier, right, was still present in the ruling at this point in time. So like I mentioned, he had a sound theological grounding in scripture and doctrine. You may know, I'll get to later, he wrote some hymns, by the way, that we still sing in our church. He was highly educated, so he was fluent in both Latin and Greek, so he could speak for both sides of the empire, so to speak, clearly and fluently. And he wanted to govern in a harmonious way with the Orthodox Church. He was not at all opposed. He was in the church and part of the church, and that it was all like one activity that he was involved in to try to create some kind of order and peace and holiness for the kingdom of God, which he saw the empire as representative. And he also believed that doctrine was very important. It said that doctrine was shaped the civilization. So he saw this, as a result, it means he saw a divine order in society based on the doctrine of the church. So it wasn't just ruling, and like we think today, we see no sense of our government or anything having some kind of desiring some divine order in society, right? It's not even a concept that we even think of being part of our government. So what would divine order look like? Can you even imagine it? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Our government would be as important as the church in ordering our lives, right?
Isn't that the union of church and state?
Yeah, we have a totally opposite thing. Separation of church and state, right? It's like we have an opposite kind of idea. So we'll see this playing out in Justinian's rule, what this means, what all this, we'll go through some of these elements as we go through here. So the idea of this divine order is the priesthood guides the soul, and the emperor rules the body and protects the church. So like there's these two functions that are taking place that are ordered in harmony, so to speak. So when they're both in harmony, we have a divine order in society, is the idea of this divine order. So he was a Christian statesman, you'd have to say. He governed under God in service to the church. That idea of a separation to him wasn't even part of his conception of how, what the empire was and how it was to be ruled. But there were some controversies still so raged from the disagreements from the Fourth Council of Chalcedon. And remember, this is when we had some splits that took place, right? The Arian controversy had pretty much been resolved, and so that Christ was truly God, right? And human, but so that everyone pretty much has agreed to that. But what was left was the nature of that. How do you describe that? And what was the natures? Was there one nature, two natures, and so forth? Those kind of questions came up. So how to describe it was still an issue for many people and a serious issue for a lot. So how would you describe the union of God and man? What would your view be on that? Does that seem like something important or not? To us, maybe not. We keep all that for as assumption of the way it is, right? But in these days, people were debating over these kind of questions. And it relates to what Christ was and what his role could be in terms of our salvation. So in the end, it came to be really important questions. So the two natures, the Chalcedonian kind of formula, so to speak, versus one united divine human nature, which was non-Chalcedonian. This was the kind of the disagreement that was taking place that affected, if you dig into the theology of affects our salvation. So this issue still divides churches to this particular day. They're called the Oriental Orthodox churches. You probably heard of those, right? And this the Coptic Church is one of them, the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches, and Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church of India. So these are still hold the doctrine that is not in agreement with Chalcedon. Now there's some disagreement. They're saying that it's just a misunderstanding, that the language is the issue in this case. And I think that's pretty clear for the Coptics anyway, that it's probably true. But for some of them, they still will say that it's Christotokos, not Theotokos, which indicates there's still a mindset that creates a little bit of difference in the basic doctrine of the church that exists. Other than that, the churches are going to appear very similar, except for those statements like that. So he wanted to heal, Justinian wanted to heal this schism that's still raged in the empire, and to get this theological unity throughout the whole empire, and resolve any of the lingering Nestorian influences that still existed. So he called the council. So he didn't, how's he going to solve this, right? This is the idea of the council again. You call the bishops together, and they are going to figure it out, right? So it was held in Constantinople, presided by Patriarch Eutychius of Constantinople. And the council was to reaffirm Chalcedon's Christology, which one person, two natures, and showing this continuity with St. Cyril's theology, which used different terms. So this was the controversy that they were to deal with. And they upheld the Chalcedonian Council of one person of Christ and two united natures, fully God and fully man. So no change. So this was a big thing. So Justinian did not heal the schism, but the important thing is there was no compromise, because there were people that were saying, well, let's just figure out a way to make it all work together. We're all in the same party, right? Same boat, so to speak. So this was not the role of the Ecumenical Council. The Ecumenical Council was to defend the truth, and that they did. So it didn't resolve the controversy, however, but it did maintain the truth. So, and then the imperial office then would enforce this results of the council. So this was the role, the combination role of the empire versus the church. Now if they decided, the empire then would help make this the part of the way that the empire was ruled. So there were, at that point then, the bishops that did not agree with the results of the council were disposed. So there was some turmoil that took place as a result of that particular time. But the important thing is, orthodoxy was kept pure. It was kept true. So this is what has taken place at various steps throughout this historical period, where the faith that we practice has been maintained because of these kind of decisions and actions that were taking place way back when. So Justinian also reunited the control over the Mediterranean. So he had some good battles, you might say, or conquests that took place to reunite the as you can see in the map there, all around that had been splintered prior to that time. So the North Africa from the Vandals in 533, in Italy from the Ostrogoths in 535, and parts of Spain from the Visigoths. So he brought much of the empire back together physically at that point in time. So you might think of this as being the peak of this Christian Roman civilization, because now it's all Christian, right? And so it's now a very large empire again, but has a common theology and law, architecture, imperial governments. Everything is integrated under basically Christian values. So some mark this period as a golden age of the Roman Empire. And so it did, at this point in time, reflect this idea of a heavenly order. a divine order in the way the empire was structured and governed. Let's see what some of that is. So one of Justinian's great achievements was the development of Roman law, where it integrated all moral principles. So much of the law that we have today stems from this law of Justinian, as a matter of fact. So he established a clear, authoritative legal code for the judges to use, lawyers and citizens. So this became a tool for having a Christian order to the empire. This was a big, major accomplishment of Justinian. He thought the law should teach people how to live rightly before God. This was the idea of the law, and making justice a form of divine service. He strengthened laws against heresies, paganism, immorality. He protected the church's rights, regulated monasteries, upheld Christian marriage and family life. He made the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed the sole symbol of the church, accorded it with legal force to the canons that came out of all of those councils as well, up to including all four ecumenical councils. And of course, this was the creed that we have today, that as a church we still operate by. That became like the law of the land of the time of Justinian. His reforms were not neutral, but they reflected Christian values. So it wasn't like Constantine. There was still a little bit of paganism allowed, so he was kind of dancing and moving towards a Christian world, knowing he had to keep he was in a transition period. Well, now this is totally different. This is 100% Christianity. So the sanctity of marriage was established, restricted divorce, banned adultery, protected the poor and the widows, requiring charitable giving, regulated inheritances and so forth, and established honor for the church, gave bishops judicial authority, and protected the clergy. And for the unity of faith, he condemned the heresies and enforced the Orthodox doctrine totally throughout the land, and limited the rights of slaveholders, promoting a legal process for freeing of slaves. So you can imagine, coming from the pagan world, this is a significant change in the orientation of the empire, right? He's also known for the construction of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Has anyone been to this church? This was the grandest church ever built. You can see this is the interior of it, and you can't even see the dome. It's up here, and the exterior doesn't look too great, but on the inside, if you do ever get a chance to visit it in some way, it just inside is just, it takes your breath away, actually. It's such a grand space that Justinian created based on his vision of this heavenly empire. So this is what he was trying to do, and he was very successful at it. So it had an immense dome, and some of the columns are also huge. He would get from various parts of the empire, would bring these columns from old ruins, and also would use those as making up these large columns that you see. You can see some of them in the picture there. And around the dome was the windows of light, representing the uncreated light of God. So you had light coming in from above, from heaven, so to speak, as we talk in our church. So our church has a similar model to it, in a way, much smaller scale than this, with the dome, but this is shaped a little bit different than our church. It's not totally the Byzantine basilica style. So anyway, the whole idea was to create this idea of when you entered into it for worship, you'd be lifted into heaven. And this is how it was described by the rulers of, what was his name? Vladimir, right? Who came to get the religion for his people, which Kiev was where he was hiding, which happens to be the center of Ukraine, which is where the religion was first taken back to the Slavic nations. And they came here, and this has got to be heaven, this has got to be the right religion for our people. There's all these beautiful gold mosaics that exist there. Probably they're covered now. So they reflected the theology. This was the one of the Theotokos here was up over the asp over the or the altar area, similar to where we have it in our church. And then this beautiful icon of the Mother of God and Christ and John the Baptist. Beautiful. That image of Christ done in mosaic is one you'll see quite often reproduced and used often because it's such a beautiful depiction of Christ and so forth. And you see some other of the asp in different parts of the church also had different icons, but it was, and even in what you could see when it was restored, say 10 years ago, still was not complete the way it was in the time of Justinian. So it was a sacramental space designed for the Divine Liturgy and to really give us the full mystical nature of the Orthodox worship. I can hardly imagine because I remember being there. It just, you just want to, it brings you almost to tears to see that this thing is no longer a Christian church, but it was a museum for a long period of time. And even worse now, I can't imagine what it'd be like now to see it really all dressed up as a mosque and operating as a mosque. Justinian also funded construction and restoration over 30 churches. So he was active, very active in bringing Christianity back to the forefront. The Church of St. Sergius and Bacchus were prototypes for Hagia Sophia. In fact, there's another church, I forget, that also was likely built before as a model for this grander church that he built in Constantinople. He built the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople, which is also a grand church where they put the relics of the apostles and so forth. And the churches in Ravenna, such as San Vitale, have stunning mosaics that depict Justinian as a ruler ordained by God. So his reach was vast. He also promoted monasticism. He saw this as a pillar of the Christian society. So how do people view monasticism today? At Justinian time, there was no conflict between church and monasticism. It was understood that monasticism was a pillar of the church, and it still is. Fortunately, it still is. So that's why it still retains the truths that are unchanged, even in this difficult world that we live today, right? So he was a supporter of it. Now, monks and nuns were seen as supporting the empire, its heavenly mission, to their prayers, their asceticism, their theological witness. They also encouraged the spread of learning and scripture copying, what they did in the monasteries, to preserve the theology of the church and the biblical texts. So you see the most ancient documents we have are found in the monasteries, in the old monasteries today. So he funded and supported many monasteries, the monastic churches, both in Constantinople and throughout the empire, including a very famous one. That's Mount Sinai that you see there. And the church, the building you see below, there still exists to this day, was built by Justinian, St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai. So it's built at the foot of the mountain where Moses received the Ten Commandments. And in that monastery, there is the largest collection of ancient icons. So, and also documents as well. In fact, there's an American who became a monk there who has been responsible for establishing a library that protects and preserves all these things. Father Justin, I think his name is. Interesting, Justin, right? So these, and the icon of Christ is also a very famous one that has kind of the two natures in his face there, and so forth.
Is that the oldest icon of Christ?
Yeah, I think so. The oldest icons that we know of are in this monastery. And it's a vast collection.
Wasn't it protected from like iconoclasm?
Yes.
Because by the Muslims, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, Muhammad gave a special dispensation for people to protect this particular monastery for some reason. So that's a very famous document that they have, and they have posted there in the monastery as well. Yes, that's true. So that's why it still survives. There's the burning bush you can find there as well. Still glory, supposedly the remnants of the same bush that have been reproduced over the ages.
I'm gonna try to go there this summer too.
That's a place I would like to go. I haven't never been to Mount Sinai, but I am told that it is a very spiritual experience just to go to that place in the world. Justinian also composed hymns. You know the hymn, "The Only Begotten Son"? It's like the creed being sung, right? Only begotten Son, immortal Word of God, who for our salvation did will to be incarnate of the Holy Theotokos and ever Virgin Mary, and without change became man. You were crucified, O Christ our God, trampling down death by death, being one of the Holy Trinity, glorified together with the Father and the Holy Spirit, save us.
I've never heard it in English.
Huh?
And it wasn't connected. I've never heard it in English.
Yeah, sometimes when the chanters are doing the service, often they will do it in English because they know how important it is for the content of it, right? But it is like the crease, and this is traced back to the hand of Justinian. All right, so this is a very important hymn. So just think how it teaches Christology and confesses the Nicene faith, forms the soul of the believer through prayer, all done by the emperor himself, right? And guarding the church against the errors of the church. So this is how things are preserved in our hymnology, in our liturgical practice as well. The truth is preserved unchanged from the very beginning.
Thank you, Justinian.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very important. After Justinian's death in 565, this vision of the Christian Empire began to fracture. So like happens often with after Constantine, right? His sons did not carry forward. Fortunately, the Theodosius, right, came on fairly quickly after that, within 50 years. So there began to become military pressures that were changing things at this point in time. So there had some weak followers from Justinian. So we had the immersion in the Muslim invasions beginning to take place, and the Byzantine Empire was slowly giving way to a more militarized and Greek-centered empire was beginning to take place after Justinian. But his legacy endured in the law, in the liturgy, the architecture, but the empire he tried to hold together began slipping into a difficult transition period that we'll see coming up, but it doesn't last for long. Here's what was happening. See the green area? This was the conquest being made by the Muslims. So they're taking over most of the Mediterranean, right? And here we have Constantinople up here, right? So this is the pressure coming this way. So that was all, let's see, most of that was in the 7th century that we're talking about here. So it's a big shift taking place because of this Muslim influence. Okay, so the Christians were granted, under the occupations that took place, you see a lot of Christian lands were occupied, including the area around Jerusalem and so forth. They were granted limited toleration. Maybe that's the easiest way to put it. If they were to evangelize, which is still true in many Muslim countries, that was subject to death. You couldn't build new churches or maintain existing ones. That's still true in Turkey and probably other Muslim nations. You couldn't display the cross or do bell ringing. And you had to pay an onerous tax for the privilege of remaining Christians. So, okay, you can be a Christian, but you're not going to be able to build your church, and you're going to pay a lot of extra money to have this privilege to remain as a Christian. So it was a way of quietly strangling, right, Christianity, not letting it take over or control or keep it under some kind of control. The bishops were given a privileged status because they were the ones that were responsible for keeping order among the Christians. So at least they let the bishops take over that. And so a lot of this Christian population became Muslim. It was an easier way of life to fall into that way of being at that time. So you had shifting from Christian to Muslim. The Syriac and the Coptic churches survived. The lands of Ephraim the Syrian, Antioch the Great, disappeared under this oppressive veil. So there's huge shifts taking place. Then along comes another leader. Good or bad? We'll see. Leo III, the Usurian, a skilled warrior. So he looks like he's worried there from his picture, doesn't he? Born in 685 in Syria. He came to power in a period when there was a rapid succession of emperors. So there was a lot of turmoil in the leadership. But he was a decisive, practical, and militarily gifted person. And he gave the empire some stability after 2 decades of anarchy. He was deeply religious and saw himself as the defender of the true faith. So he started take the right steps, right? So by 718, he resisted a 1-year siege on Constantinople, resisting 100,000 Arab forces. So he was very honored for this ability to protect the empire at this point in time. And he also is so known for his this new technology called the Greek fire. No one really knows for sure what it was, but there's a picture showing it was some kind of device that shot flames out, and it was a very fierce. Pardon? What'd you say?
A medieval flamethrower.
Yeah, evil flame, some kind of flamethrower. Yeah.
Napalm.
Yeah. So anyway, it's kind of it's kind of cloaked in mystery to you try to find out what it really was, but it's known to be a real force that gave advantage to the Byzantines at the time. Now the Virgin Mary also played a role because they would carry her icons in processions on the city walls to protect the cities, especially during this time of the siege. Her robe was kept in the church there in Constantinople, was brought out and used to bless the walls and the defenders. So she was very central in this defense. And they sang the Iconoclast hymn. It had come earlier times, but was first composed after this miraculous difference from the Persians in 626 that praises her as the champion general. And the Arabs relented on the celebration of her Dormition. So this siege was ended on the Domitian of the Theotokos when they were using her to defend and protect the city. So what do we do on Friday nights during Lent?
The Iconoclast salutation.
It's this hymn that we sing, same hymn. That goes back to this time. So here in this hymn, the Theotokos honors defender of Christians and the guardian of the church. But also it's tied to this historical experience. She really did defend the city at that particular time. Oh, to thee, O champion general, we thy service dedicate a hymn of victory and thanksgiving, as one's rescued out of sufferings, O Theotokos, but as thou art one with might which is invincible from all dangers that can be, do thou deliver us, that we may cry to thee, rejoice, O bride unwedded. Yeah, St. Romanus the Medalist, you're correct. So there's a whole series of salutations that are also recited during the singing of this hymn. So we sing it in 4 parts, and then in the last 5th Friday night, we do the whole hymn together on the Friday nights. So come on Friday nights. It's a really nice service. Okay, so it's about the Church's love for the Mother of God, is the hymn. It's why it's considered to be an important part of our Lenten practice, and her role as protector and mother, and the experience of God's deliverance through her intercessions, as she is a powerful interceder for us. Intercessor, I guess, a better way to say it. The beauty of the Orthodox hymnography can be seen through hymns like this, plus all the other hymns that are all recorded in the service books of the church. We don't make up hymns. We have thousands of them that have been passed on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you want to study the theology of the church, you also should study the hymnology of the church. So it's simultaneously theological, historical, and also can be deeply personal. Okay, back to our story then. The invaders would not return to take Constantinople until the Turks during the 15th century. So some period later before Constantinople itself was in danger from invaders. But the Arabs continued their attacks in the west, conquering most of Spain, pushed into Gaul, but the Frankish King Charles, don't forget King Charles, right? Martel stopped them from saving the European Christians. And it was beginning the reforms, and this was beginning when we begin to see these reforms taking place in the West that we'll talk about next time, that would change the character of the church in the West and begin to create two different churches. So this Muslim conquest severed the classical world and forced the redefinition of Western Christian identity, pushing Europe into a new path, a whole new way of worshiping, if you look at the differences that we'll see coming forward, and leading to medieval feudalism, the rise of the papacy, and the Crusades, all are born out of this turmoil that began to take place. So this whole new world religion was beginning to develop, and a whole new civilization in the West, with its own theology, its own legal system, its own philosophy and science, and the idea of a universal empire. Next time we'll dig into this. So the Christian identity is beginning to be split, starting at this time, but it's still one church. There still is not two churches. It's still under one idea of a single church. Byzantium had lost its wealthiest province, Egypt and Syria, so had to restructure into a war-based kind of society. So the nature of what the emperor was called to do became quite different with more limited resources. And the trade routes were also being disrupted. So, but in 926, Leo III, same Leo, Isaurian, believed the use of icons was the cause of this difficulty that the empire was facing. So if you're in trouble as a leader, right, you have to find a scapegoat, right? So he found the scapegoat to believe was the icons. These icons were what was causing the empire to falter. They lost Syria, Palestine, Egypt, much of Anatolia to Islamic armies. Constantinople had faced this massive Arab siege that they obviously successfully withstood. And there were also natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanic activity, a plague, all happened during his reign. So there's many difficulties. So he was looking at what's causing all this. And he concluded that God was punishing the empire. So in a sense, for his perspective, faith was lost, right? He no longer had faith that the church was going to be the way that the empire would be saved and brought forward. Also, another factor was Islam forbade religious images. So he's saying, well, those guys are doing good. Maybe it's because they didn't have images why they're doing good, right? And who else didn't have images? The Jews, right? So they were taunted by both the Christians, by the Muslims and the Jews for idolatry. And since they were so successful, this impressed Leo and led him to this idea of getting rid of icons. So he had come from Assyria, so his worldview was more practical, materialistic. He wasn't theological, but he had only a literalist kind of understanding of theology. Yes?
Well, where
Chris?
is that region? Isaiah?
Pardon?
Where is it? Isaria, what part of the region is that?
Oh, I think around Syria and that part of the world.
Okay.
That's where he was born.
Okay.
The monasteries were especially suspect because they represented the theological opposition to his worldview. Remember, the monasteries were really into believing in the heavenly perspective, right? And he was a literist. He was of this world. He was a secularist, I guess you would say in our terms, right? In his way of thinking. So his attacked icons led to a significant challenge on monasticism. So it began by removing the large image of Christ at the Chalke gate. This was the icon you can see represented here. Large icon over the entrance to the ceremonial area of the palace. So this scored quite a stir. Here you see the great palace, and this is where the entrance was here. So this icon, taking it down, was very disturbing to the population there, because this represented the unity of Christian and the state, right? This was the way they had all lived for a long time. And so this became a very disrupting event in the empire when that was taken down. Like, there was, what's wrong with this? So riots broke out and ignited a century of theological and political conflict. So this didn't end quickly. Christ was being publicly rejected, the faith was being altered, the people thought, and the world's sacred order was being disrupted. And they thinking the emperor was now overstepping his divine boundaries. He was interfering with the church, not supporting the church. So remember, that was the history of what had taken place up to this point. So we're losing this idea of symphonia, right? In 730, he issued an edict requiring destruction of all icons in the empire. So you can imagine what that'd be, okay? Our government today would say, we outlaw all icons in this country. Then he amasses the army to come get rid of them all, right? This is what took place at this point in time. You can imagine what disruption it was caught to what had become a Christian world, a Christian empire. Patriarch Germanus I of Constantinople, very respected, devout bishop, refused to support this edict and was disposed, breaking this symphonia. So they just threw him out. He taught that icons, he had the right teaching. He taught the icons affirm the incarnation of Christ. Since Christ became truly human, his images should be depicted and can be predicted. So it wasn't any theological controversy. Honor given to an icon passes on to the prototype, another true teaching, as we'll see in the next ecumenical council that comes up. And that the church had always used icons. So to reject them is to reject the whole tradition of the church. And this was like a huge effort that Leo was making. So he's forced to resign, and he retires to a monastery. So now Leo appoints his own leader, right, for the church, so he can control everything, right? So it's a whole new ball game here, isn't it? Whole new ball game. Monks and the faithful laypeople are resisting, which is causing persecution to take place. So you resist, you're going to be dealt with by the forces that be, right? Monasteries were closed or attacked. Icons were destroyed or painted over. Iconophile clergy and monastics were imprisoned, exiled, or tortured, or even killed in some cases. And some monks were forced to marry, violating their vows. But fortunately, I shouldn't say fortunately, in 741, Leo dies. But his son Constantine becomes emperor, who intensifies iconoclasm, intensifies the fight. Yeah. So Constantine V calls the Council of Hieria, which condemned the veneration of icons as heresy. But this was a fake council. There was not even a patriarch was involved in the council. For 30 years, he viciously persecutes all these people that still are supporting icons, especially the monks. Soldiers were used to remove the icons from the churches, whitewash the frescoes, destroy relics or shrines that encourage veneration, declared icons not only theological wrong, but tools of demonic deception. So these are evil things. Monastic as a whole was attacked and the lands confiscated. Monks disbanded or mutilated. So it was a terrible period of time. But he dies too.
The
So-
original Calvinists.
Yeah, I guess, okay. Oh, good thought. Oh, and then we had, though, after the Calvinists, we had those wars too, right? So it was maybe a similar kind of thing, right? So Constantine V dies in 775, and his son Leo IV inherited the throne, and he marries Irene of Athens, a devout iconophile. In other words, she supports icons, okay? So this sets the stage for change. But Constantine V is still in power, right? His son, Leo IV, inherits the throne, as we said. So he dies a natural death not long afterwards, leaving the throne to his 9-year-old son, Constantine IV, with Irene as regent. It means Irene was the ruler because her son was not yet of age to be able to rule.
It's Constantine 6.
Hmm?
You said 4.
You got your eye in the wrong place.
Okay, yeah. 6th, excuse me. Constantine the 6th with Irene as regent. Now, she becomes empress eventually, and she favors the restoration of the icons and replace the iconoclast bishops with iconophile ones, the ones that supported icons. So she reorders things according to the original order, because she's bringing it back to the way it was before all this disturbance took place, and begin working towards establishing an ecumenical council to deal with this heresy. So she calls the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Nicaea, which is attended by 350 bishops. So it's a large council by bishops. And this turns out to be the last ecumenical council that we've had in the church. And in that council, icons are defended by a very well-known saint, St. John of Damascus. And he argues, now that the invisible one has become visible in the flesh, it is not only permissible but necessary to depict him in icons. Same thing as the original that was thrown out by Leo, right? So since God entered his creation in human form, his image must be depicted to be honored. To ban icons undermines the doctrine of his two natures. So this was significant doctrinally. He goes on to say, we keep unchanged all the ecclesiastical traditions handed down to us, one of which is the making of pictorial representations agreeable to the history of the preaching of the gospel, especially as confirming the fact of the true and real incarnation of God, the incarnation. Remember, coming back to that, the central theme of incarnation. Incarnation of God the Word, and not merely as having appeared in illusion. For the more frequently the icons, are seen in artistic representation, the more those who behold them are lifted up to the memory of their prototypes and to a longing after them. This is the faith of the apostles. This is the faith of the fathers. This is the faith of the Orthodox. This is the faith which has established the universe. So you're going to hear these similar words in the service that we'll have on Sunday as we celebrate the result of this council. So we all take icons for granted now, right? Most of us have them, a lot of them in our homes and so forth. Okay, the Seventh Ecumenical Council gives us an affirmation of the use of icons. So it's a very important ecumenical council. It says that we are to venerate, honor icons. That's orthodox. It's not unusual. This is what we're supposed to do. Worship is due to God alone, but we can honor and be given to icons, saints, and relics. So it affirms this way of honoring things like relics, icons, and saints. And since Christ became incarnate, he can be depicted in images. That's one of the main things that we saw from St. John of Damascus. So this council officially ended the first iconoclast period, 726 to 787, restoring peace between the church and the imperial government, at least for the moment. It's not quite over yet, right? Some things take a while to fully resolve. But anyway, make a note here, like it says here, note the power and authority of these councils, right? They always went back to the council to resolve these issues, right? Among the bishops. That's where that power came to maintain the church on the right track. Okay, the decrees were implemented across the empire after this council. Icons were restored to the churches, bishops were reconciled, and iconodules, those are favorite icons, were released from exile. So things look like they're going back to normal. However, the army still felt they should be in control. They were under the spell of Assyrian, Leo the Assyrian, right? Irene's son, Constantine the Sixth, came to age in 790. What do you think is going to happen now? He's going to want to get rid of Irene, don't you think?
Yeah.
Doesn't power kind of take over all these things? So he tried to take control, but she had him blinded. So he was trying to usurp her authority, and it was someone that was blind was considered incapable of serving as an emperor. So it disqualified him from serving as the emperor. And then she declared herself the sole ruler, the first woman emperor. This gave Charlemagne in the West now, we'll get that, we have a descendant of Charlemagne here. Charlemagne in the West gave an opening to declare her reign invalid, and then he could claim himself the ruler of the entire empire, because she was not a valid emperor. And so he was crowned emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in 800. You can see but these differences beginning to develop east and west, right? So we created a rival Roman Empire in the West, beginning to deepen this east-west divide that we'll talk more about next week.
Charlemagne.
So Irene's financial policies, she was a big spender apparently, but she also gave tax relief to the monasteries, made tribute payments to the caliphate to protect the empire from defeat, and then political intrigues began led by the military commanders, because they were of a different mindset than Irene. And they got pressures from the Bulgars still, and the Arabs were coming in, which they had already fought off, and there was some concern that she wasn't strong enough maybe to defend the empire at this point in time. And of course, being a woman, these soldiers probably didn't have a lot of respect for her as a woman taking this power position, and so her position became weakened because of the military. So she had good support within the, the inner circle of the government, but the military still reigned powerful. In 802, she was overthrown in a palace coup, led by her finance minister, Nicephorus I, who became emperor. This is part of the term they call Byzantine intrigue. She was exiled to Lesbos, where she died in the next year. So now Irene is out of the pictures. Now it's Nicephorus' turn. He reigned in 802 to 811. He accepted the decrees of the Second Council of Nicaea, but left the icon issue in place, left the issue of icons in place. He didn't change the policy at all. His reign was more about fiscal and military affairs, and he died in a battle against the Bulgars in 811. Then we have Leo V, the Armenian. This sounds like kind of a sinister character here, right? Leo the Armenian, I don't know, somehow it resonates with me. The second Iconoclast period begins. So here we come again. The military disasters against the Bulgars made many think, again, God's wrath was on Byzantium. It was the icons. It wasn't that our soldiers weren't doing any good, or we didn't have good rulers. Leo V concluded icons were the blame and revived iconoclasm in 815, annulling the Council of Nicaea, Second Council. He was then assassinated during the Divine Liturgy on Christmas Day while he was chanting in the choir by his conspirators disguised as monks. Can you imagine? This is probably Hagia Sophia. He was then succeeded by Michael II, whom Leo had imprisoned earlier. Still supported iconoclasm, but not aggressively. Was politically pragmatic, but not ideologically driven. So he was kind of a neutral, not going to change anything. We're just going to keep things going. The important thing to realize, the church keeps going forwards. It survives all this stuff. Theophilus, his son, a committed iconoclast against icons, renewed harsh persecutions against those that defended icons, the iconodules. He admired that Islamic art again and science and wanted a pure Christianity. Pure mean no images, I guess. And despite his persecution, the iconophile movement persisted strongly. It couldn't be snuffed out. This is the nature of the church. It can't be stuffed out. Even in Stalin's time in Russia, right? He tried to eliminate everything, blew up churches, killed monks in person. It did not kill the church. It can't be killed. He dies. In 840 time, his wife Theodora becomes regent of son Michael III, and she supports the use of icons, ending the conflict, and this becomes known as the triumph of orthodoxy. So with the backing of Patriarch Methodius, she restores the veneration of icons in 843. On the 11th of March, my dear wife's birthday, the triumph of orthodoxy was celebrated in Hagia Sophia with a great procession of icons. This is why on Sunday we have a procession of icons. Some churches actually have a procession that goes around the city or around the church. We'll just have a small procession that takes place within the church. With the backing of Patriarch Methodius, she restores the venerations of icons. Same thing. Triumph was celebrated in Hagia Sophia with great procession of icons. And since that year, this first Sunday of Great Lent, it celebrates this event through all the Orthodox world. So every Orthodox church has this celebration on the first Sunday of Lent, affirming the truth of orthodoxy. The orthodoxy persists and remains true. So it's still intact as a whole idea, right? After 1,000 years, nothing has changed, even with all these differences. With greater clarity of the doctrine through the councils, were developed through these different periods of trials, right? A system of laws based on Christian values was established by Justinian. We have the symphonia is upheld, and we're still one church at this point in time. After 1,000 years, there's still only one church. It's honored between the East and West as a single church, even though there's these political currents taking place in the West already, like under Charlemagne. So what comes next? What happens next?
The schism.
The Great Schism. So this is where the church splits into two different churches. And I will show you how different they became and how that took place, which I think is a very interesting story about how this happened. It was not just a casual thing that took place. It was very instrumented by various kinds of forces, interestingly enough, but all driven by idea of papal supremacy was the underlying idea that basically underlined the nature of this split. So any questions?